Thank you, Mandalee. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the annual California Adult Education Program Summit 2022. We're so happy to have you. I want to extend a special welcome to our consortia leads and CAPE members and partners with us today, as well as to our distinguished opening ceremony panel, State Director of Adult Education, Dr. Carolyn Zachary, California Chancellor's Office Dean of Workforce and Economic Development, Gary Adams, Executive Vice Chancellor of Educational Services, Marty Alvarado, Interim Vice Chancellor of Workforce and Economic Development, Sandra Sanchez, Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction, Student Support Services Branch, Steve Zimmer, and Director of Career and College Transition Division, Pete Callis. My name is Renee Collins, Director of Adult Education at Sacramento County Office of Education, overseeing both the CAPE Technical Assistance Project, or CAPE TAP, and the Outreach and Technical Assistance Network, more commonly known as OTAN. It's my privilege and great pleasure on behalf of CAPE TAP to welcome you here today. We are delighted to have you with us to participate and share in this highly anticipated event, our 6th annual CAPE Summit. Thank you for being here to launch this year's event. That many of you have committed to engaging with us virtually for the next 4 days serves as a reminder to us all how important our work is. The California Community College Chancellor's Office and the California Department of Education are working in partnership to administer the California Adult Education Program. With 7 approved program areas, CAPE serves nearly 500,000 students that enroll in non-credit community colleges and K-12 adult education programs annually. And this number is growing as students reconnect with educational institutions post-pandemic. CAPE appropriates funds through 71 regional consortia across the state that include close to 400 members from community colleges, K-12 adult schools, county offices of education, and a variety of community partners, including but not limited to local workforce investment boards, libraries, and community-based organizations. California adult education programs support adults 18 and older to meet their educational, work, and life goals, which can include earning a high school diploma or high school equivalency certificate, learning to speak English or learning to become a citizen, exploring careers, learning new job skills, and earning job certificates. Ultimately, students in CAPE programs gain skills to be contributing productive members of their local economy and communities. A special thank you to our frontline and support staff, teachers, counselors, transition specialists, and others who are key to making these outcomes possible. This year, our summit theme is "The Power is Yours. Use your plan to evolve and re-engage." In 2021-22, you as consortia worked with your members, partners, and community to build a 3-year strategic plan to address the educational needs of your community, improve the effectiveness of your services, improve integration of services, and to improve transitions into post-secondary education in the workforce. Now, from 2022 to 25, it is time to act and implement strategies to help you achieve your objectives. The summit is intended to motivate, inspire, and teach us how to move forward successfully. The power is truly yours to engage and learn this week together. We have some amazing presenters that are prepared to share with us what their region is doing to support adult learners. Make it your goal to walk away with at least one new resource or idea for the implementation each day. CAPE TAP has scheduled 65 sessions that address the CAPE state priorities of equity, leadership, learner transition, program development, technology and distance learning, program evaluation, and marketing. The adult education state priorities align with the Chancellor's Vision for Success goals and the CDE State Superintendent's initiatives. I would guess that many of these topics are also addressed in your 3-year plan. Other summit highlights include our plenary address with Ken Shelton of Elevate Education. Tomorrow morning, he will be talking about how CAPE Consortia can use design thinking to effectively implement and evaluate the 22-25 3-year plan. Directly following, we will recognize our 2 top scoring programs for the Advancing California Adult Education Model Program nominations and recognize 2 of our 2021 Student Succeed honorees. At 2 p.m. tomorrow, participants can take part in mini sessions designed to ask a leading content person how to apply information related to a topic area at the consortium and local level. The mini sessions are meant to be a conversation as opposed to a presentation. On Thursday at 1 p.m., we will offer several networking or jam sessions to choose from, and discussion will be facilitated by your adult education colleagues. The purpose of a jam session is for attendees to come ready to discuss and exchange ideas on topics related to our state priorities. Discussion is guaranteed to be lively and interactive. Throughout the summit, be sure to check out the exhibitor booths and chat with the vendors. Also participate in the sponsored breaks and lunch sessions to hear more about what our exhibitors have to offer. We can't have a summit without a leaderboard and prizes. Donations have been provided by our generous exhibiting sponsors. And finally, share your conference experiences on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter with the hashtags Cape Summit 22, Adult EDU, Adult Education, and EdTech. Our summit wouldn't be what it is without the active input of my extended team from Cape TAP. A huge thank you to Cape TAP's coordinator, Veronica Parker, project specialist, Mandalee Gonzalez, and administrative assistant, Holly Clark. They've each been working tirelessly to create this incredible professional learning event for you. I also wanted to give recognition and thanks to our OTAN programming and development team with a special mention to programmer Justin Timko, and to our OTAN training and support team who are assisting as tech hosts throughout the event. At this time, I would like to introduce Dr. Carolyn Zachary. I will read a brief bio and then pass it off to her. Dr. Carolyn Zachary is currently the State Director and Educational Administrator for the Adult Education Office in the Career and College Transition Division at the California Department of Education. Her office is responsible for administration and management of the Federal Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, Title II grant, as well as co-administration of the state-funded California Adult Education Program. Prior to her time in the Adult Education Office, Dr. Zachary was the administrator for the office with the federal Perkins and state CTE incentive grants. She was on the team responsible for the revisions to and professional development for the California Career Technical Education Standards. She is the past president of the executive committee for the National Association for Partnerships in Equity. Prior to joining the CDE team, Dr. Zachary was a county office program coordinator, where she started a county administered adult education program. Within her 34 years in education, she has also served as a site principal and teacher. Outside of education, Dr. Zachary is on the executive board of the California State Chapter of Providing Educational Opportunities for Women. And at this time, I'll invite Dr. Zachary.
All right, well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time this week out of your very busy schedules to participate in the multitude of sessions, as Renee described, that have been put together for all of you, for you to grow your programs, for you to work on your 3-year plans, and for all of you to really provide the best opportunities that you can for your students. I hope that this week you will realize that the power is yours, and the power is yours to re-engage your students, to re-engage your staff, to look at your 3-year plan and see how you can truly elevate your programs. I wish you all the best this week, and you'll be hearing a little more from Gary and myself a little later. Thank you. Renee, you're on mute.
Thank you, Carolyn. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Gary Adams as well, and then I will invite Carolyn to, then I will invite Gary to introduce his team, and then I will invite Carolyn back to invite her team to speak. So Gary Adams is a dean in the California Community College Chancellor's Office, Workforce and Economic Development Division, as well as co-administrator of the California Adult Education Program. Dean Gary Adams has over 3 decades of high-level management experience in higher education, general government, and in the private sector, receiving awards for excellence in service and accomplishment in all. In the private sector, he worked as a senior director or manager at 2 Fortune 500 companies, Deloitte and Blackboard. He also built the then largest information technology and audit consulting company in Philadelphia as its managing director, with the company later sold to Grant Thornton. In California, Dean Adams has worked for the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, the State Senate Rules Committee, the Student Aid Commission, the Governor's Office of Policy and Planning, and most recently, the California Community College Chancellor's Office. And at this time, I'll pass it off to Dean Adams.
Thank you very much, Renee. Welcome everyone to this year's California Adult Education Summit. I have the honor of introducing the executive leadership from the California Community College Chancellor's Office. As Executive Vice Chancellor, Marty Alvarado provides leadership for the Office of Equitable Student Learning, Experience and Impact, ESLE, while Interim Vice Chancellor Sandra Sanchez is the office's leader for Workforce and Economic Development. In her role, EVC Alvarado is responsible for the administration, integration of instruction, workforce, and student support services in the Chancellor's Office. As Marty leads the effort to re-envision these critical student success functions for our 116 college system, she has set 3 vision destinations for our nation's largest system of public higher education and workforce training. Number 1, to create empowered learners. Number 2, to advance career mobility. And 3, to create system-wide unconditional belonging. Prior to joining the Chancellor's Office team in 2019, EVC Alvarado provided support for scaling up regional cross-sector partnerships and state systems engaged in large-scale transformation. This work focused on building regional ecosystems to support pathways to college and career success and economic advancement across the state. With nearly 20 years of experience in higher education and the community college system, EVC Alvarado brings an expertise in program development and implementation, community engagement and partnerships, industry engagement and work-based learning, and has served as a director of learning, communities, and workforce training. Interim Vice Chancellor for Workforce and Economic Development, Sandra Sanchez, brings more than 28 years of experience in leadership, staff development, collaborative governance, and project management, both in the public and private sector. As Interim Vice Chancellor, she is responsible for a portfolio of more than $1.2 billion, serving the nation's largest system of community colleges. She administers the Strong Workforce Program, the Strong Workforce K-12 program, the California Apprenticeship Initiative, CAPE, the California Adult Education Program, Nursing and Allied Health, Federal Perkins 5, and Economic and Workforce Development Program. Prior to the Chancellor's Office, IVC Sanchez served as a Dean of Academic Affairs and Dean of Workforce and Economic Development at Los Angeles Harbor College for 8 years, where she led workforce education and educational programs leading to certificates and degrees. Her commitment to accessible, affordable, and quality education has fueled her value of lifelong learning, and she has successfully run adult education, continuing education, virtual education, emeritus education, corporate and customized training, and intergovernmental agreements at every institution that she has served at. Colleagues, it is my distinct honor to introduce to you Executive Vice Chancellor Alvarado and Vice Chancellor Sanchez.
Good morning. Thank you, Gary. I'm hoping you have our slides. If not, I can wing it.
I should be able to do that for you. 1 second.
Thank you. It looks like there is a full house today. So I am happy to jump in and excited to be here with you all this morning. I will try to go quickly as I know you have a jam-packed agenda. Love our CAPE group and excited to be joining you this morning. Next slide, please. I wanted to spend a little bit of time this morning just sharing some information about where we are headed at the community college system, what our board has been prioritizing as we have been navigating the vision for success. And hopefully some of this is information folks have heard from us before. So this may not be new for some and may be super new for others. Wanted to talk a little bit about how we are thinking about our work from a transformative perspective, recognizing that we have historically been in a reform perspective. So let's spend a few minutes just reflecting on a term that is near and dear to many of us in the community college system, which is initiative fatigue. There are many, many efforts that we have been trying to mobilize around that often fall in that reform bucket, really thinking about pilots and programs and efforts that work in spite of our system. We have been really trying to lean into transformational change, which is moving us out of that reform, layering on top of, and really changing the shape and form and substance of. Next slide, please. I want to just put in front of folks, hopefully, again, this is a repeat for many folks. Hopefully you all are also using this in your presentations. If we are trying to transform, being clear about what we are trying to transform into, recognizing that structurally, and I think this hopefully will really resonate for this group of professionals who have been trying to work in spite of our system, right? Going from being designed and structured systemically to operate in the shape of that red educate box, where we are in front of the work cycle and the retirement cycle, to really moving into structures that enable us to more effectively walk alongside folks. So really thinking about all of the friction points that we experience as we try to serve our adult populations as they navigate the world of work, rather than using expressions that represent structures that really speak to sort of coming back to, right? You have to come back to school, go back to do something in terms of upskilling and retraining, and really thinking about how are we walking alongside folks and how do we build the structures that actually facilitate that. Next slide, please. Again, trying to go quickly here because I want to get through our 20 minutes, our brief time together, and give you as much information as possible. What I want to highlight here is that as we think about the transform space, I want to highlight for folks, in particular, some of our partners and folks who haven't heard this message yet or haven't been directly impacted by the transformations. Our board is really focused. Our board of governors is really focused on engaging as a catalyst to create the conditions necessary for the transformations that we highlighted a moment ago. So they are hyper-focused on the regulatory environment, the investments that our state receives, and the different types of works and resolutions that they need to do in order to emphasize and mobilize action around transformational change. As an example of this, our board over the last 3 years, think all throughout the pandemic, has engaged in 22 regulatory actions that have changed the structures of our system. Many of those have just recently been approved by the state, and our campuses are now going to be busy at work trying to change and shift the structures and operations of their campuses. Things from grading like EW and pass no pass grading options, all the way to employee evaluations with new DEI competency requirements for every single employee across our system. So lots of change happening at our board that is pushing different conversations both within stakeholder groups like the adult ed population, as well as pushing new efforts across our boards and our campuses. Next slide, please. All in service. We're not transforming for the sake of transforming. It is all in service of the vision for success. As many of you know, we are in the process of searching for a new chancellor. We are very excited about the opportunity to welcome new leadership to our chancellor's office, but that doesn't mean that our vision and our commitments will change. So I want to emphasize here that our board has doubled down and recommitted to the vision for success and our vision goals, which you see up here. I like to say everywhere, I hope everyone has these printed out next to their computers and are continually thinking about how the work that we are doing within our individual programs, within our individual efforts, are aligned to the visions and deliberately advancing the vision goals, and how we're thinking about how we know or how we understand whether or not the work that we are engaged in is actually moving the needle on student outcomes and student experience. I want to highlight here that one of our commitments, number 7, is cross-system partnerships, really thinking about how do we effectively create structures to engage with our partner organizations like K-12, like post-secondary, four-year institutions like workforce, like nonprofit organizations, in order to ensure that students have the resources that they need and the pipeline that they need in order to be able to realize the outcomes that they are coming to us for. Next slide, please. What we also want to highlight here in terms of the vision, the double down and the recommitment to the vision by our board, is that our governor has also committed to our vision goals. Our governor's office has engaged in a compact with our system for the roadmap for the future, which outlines performance outcomes, vision goals, if you will, for 2022 through 2026. It was also, this roadmap for the future compact was also included in our state budget this past year, and it directly informs the governor's commitment to fund our system in alignment with our efforts to advance the vision goals. Our team worked very closely with the governor's office. Our team at the chancellor's office worked very closely with the governor's office to ensure tight alignment between the roadmap for the future and our vision goals, to reinforce this connection and this commitment statewide. Board of Governors, new chancellor coming in, and our governor and Department of Finance are all singularly united in their commitment to the vision goals and the vision commitments. And for all of us at the chancellor's office and hopefully across our system, this really speaks volumes to the trust that they have in us in terms of being able to move the needle in these areas, and the commitment that they have to the transformations we're making in order to be able to deliver on these promises. Next slide, please. The governor also has issued a post-secondary degree and certificate attainment of 70%. Our system is currently working with the governor's office and our other state agencies to understand what portion of this is a responsibility of the community college system. We look forward to working with everyone in this space and in other spaces to make sure that we are hitting this mark. I think it's important to understand, or to sort of sit with, particularly in this space, what it means for us to be thinking about degree and certificate attainment and how that interplays with the non-credit or adult ed space, and how we continue to create conversations and structures that facilitate the movement of students into those degree and certificate attainment goals, and how we make sure all of those are represented in the counts as we are moving forward. So that is work that we are continually pushing on. So I don't want folks to not see themselves in this. I want to make sure that we are creating space for everyone to be working towards this as we all try to reach the governor's goal I want to also emphasize here, we'll put an exclamation point around this is the governor's goal, but I think ultimately what we really have to lean into here for student-centered is that this is a goal for Californians, right? This is really about employability and career mobility and self-sustaining wages for Californians and Californians in each of our respective communities. And so I think that's also something that we try to lean heavily into at the Chancellor's Office, which is we can set targets, but there are real people underneath these targets. These aren't political conversations as much as they are really about our commitment to serving the 1.6 million, 1.7 million students that we currently serve in our post-secondary system. Next slide, please. Almost done. So we are trying to walk the talk at the Chancellor's Office and making sure that we are recognizing where we have to adjust in order to be able to live into that transformational focus and that transformational experience. And so at the Chancellor's Office, we have reorganized our office into three distinct offices. The Office of Ideas, I'll start at the bottom and go up. Our Executive Vice Chancellor, John Hetz, wins the award for the best acronym. The Office of Ideas, the Office of Innovation, Data, Evidence, and Analytics, really focus on that research, data, and technology. Our Office of Institutional Supports and Success, that is led by our Executive Vice Chancellor, Lizette Navarrete, oversees all of our finance, our government relations, our professional development, and our institutional effectiveness office. I want to emphasize that the focus here is that all three of these offices are expected to work interdependently and intentionally together in order to advance the structural transformation that I noted earlier. The last office at the top, our Office of Equitable Student Learning, Experience, and Impact, that is the office that I oversee, with an amazing Vice Chancellor team and an amazing support team, fantastic deans, roughly 65 professionals that are committed to academic affairs, student services, and workforce development. And I want to talk just a minute about how we are also wrestling with what it means to transform our identity and the way we think about our work together. Next slide, please. So, and let's click one more time, maybe a couple more times to get the visual. Perfect, right there. Back one. Sorry about that. So what I want to talk about here is that while we are trying to figure out how we keep the trains running, so to speak, but while we also begin to understand and figure out what it looks like for us to transform at the Chancellor's Office, we have begun to try to adopt student-centered language and a student-centered identity. And so for our Office of Equitable Student Learning, Experience, and Impact, you'll hopefully hear in our name that we are trying to center the student experience and what we are trying to achieve for students in this structure, in our identity, and where we think we are going in terms of what we need in order to realize the vision for success outcomes is that as part of what we do in everything that we do, we have to support the development of empowered learners. We have to facilitate career mobility for each and every one of our students. And we have to support generating unconditional belonging in every transaction that our students experience across our system. This is what should be underneath every single one of our efforts as we are moving forward. This takes, at least we believe, right, that this takes the focus away from us as either programs or staff or departments or its systems, you know, whether you're K-12 or community college, whether you're workforce or community college, whether you're academic affairs or workforce, whether you are a vice chancellor or a staff member. It's not about any of that. It is about the student experience. It is about figuring out how we come together to generate these types of experiences for our students and ensure that they are getting what they need and that we keep that at the center and everything works in service of that central mission. That is what we are trying to live into. We are making mistakes along the way. We are learning. It is a little bit messy, but hopefully what I want to talk about next in the next slide is that you all have begun to experience some of these changes and are engaged in providing feedback in some of these experiences as well. Next slide, please. I will keep it very short here, and I will leave this up as I hand it over to my colleague, Vice Chancellor Sanchez, for any additional comments. But what I want to highlight here is that I want to talk about what I have been lovingly calling micro changes. right? Transformation can be whole scale. Think AB 705 for those that are familiar with that transformation in our system, where it completely deconstructed our placement centers, took placement off the table, and created a different infrastructure for how we place students in math and English courses. Not everything has to be quite that disruptive. There can be lots of structural changes that happen as we implement our day-to-day operations. And so part of what we are wrestling with at the Chancellor's Office is getting clear on what is our job, right? We don't work at a campus. We don't serve students directly. So being clear that that is different work than what we do at the Chancellor's Office. And this list of 10 gives you an idea of the work that we do at the Chancellor's Office in order to support the work that you all do in direct service to students. And as part of this, we have been engaged in micro changes within each of these operational areas that are designed to, one, alleviate the administrative burden for you all, but two, to center the students and the student outcome and experience that we're targeting. An example of this could be around number 3, funding and contract management, where we are trying to reduce the type of RFAs and the administrative burden of writing grants and the inequitable outcomes of structuring funding in a way that is grant driven, and really thinking about how do we ensure that we are making strategic investments and moving away from the tell me a good story to the tell me where the need is in the data and how student experiences are changing. And let's also focus it on learning. The second piece that I'll highlight that I think couples with the learning component, no punitives, because we're pairing high expectations with high supports, back to those commitments. The other component of this is the evaluation and continuous improvement. How do we continue to look at the outcomes, the impact of each of our state investments? Again, I would move away from calling them grants to their state investments designed to achieve an outcome. And in order to understand how we are stewarding these state funds, we need to make sure that we are looking at how are we doing in terms of outcomes and where do we need to adapt in order to continue to strengthen our outcomes. Again, moving away from a punitive approach and much more into a how do we learn and adapt in order to strengthen what we are trying to do for students. The last one I'll highlight, I do love a group of 3. The last one I will highlight is the policy and regulatory actions, because I referenced those earlier, that our board has taken action on 22 regulatory changes. We are continuing to wrestle through what is the next set of regulatory policy that needs to adjust in order to ensure that we are focused on the right kind of structures that will enable us to do the work we need to do. For our board, high priorities there are around common course numbering, zero cost textbook, modern policing degrees, distance education, transfer, and there's one more, and universal design. So we are wrestling through looking at the regulations, trying to understand where there are friction points, and then simultaneously in partnership with our government relations team, we're looking at where there are challenges in ed code that impede us from being able to deliver for students and where those areas need to be updated. So just to give you an example of the work we are doing at the Chancellor's Office, what is driving our work at the Chancellor's Office, and how we are situating what our role is in supporting the transformation of our system. So with that, I will hand it over to Vice Chancellor Sanchez to see if there is any additional updates.
Thank you, Executive Vice Chancellor Alvarado. Good morning, everyone. So just to get really specific for our adult ed colleagues, as we lean into these core functions and the work that our office is engaging in, just to give you a few examples. One, evaluation and continuous improvement. One of the things we are looking at is taking a deep dive into the data. And, we've been collecting the data because you've been inputting it, reporting it to us. And so we display it in our Launchboard dashboard for adult ed. So part of the work is understanding what's happening. But I think what we're really taking a deep dive into is where we're seeing amazing outcomes for students, because what's important about that is that the whole state have amazing outcomes for students. And so we're taking deep dives into what's happening in certain regions where we see outstanding equitable outcomes for students, and we're unpacking that. And so coming soon to a theater near you, you will be contacted to participate in some of those deep dive conversations. We're going to lean into some focus groups and some data analysis to really understand how we can scale some of those best practices across the regions in the state. And we understand that, you know, one size does not fit all. And this is why we need to do the work of taking a deep dive to understanding what are the enabling conditions that need to be created for our students to be successful in our system. Another area of focus is technical assistance. As you see, it is one of our core functions. And so what we've heard a lot from our system is that you need more support, and we hear you. And so one of the things we're doing is we're expanding our TAP, our technical assistance provider, to include a specific technical assistance for community colleges, and really with the outcome and the focus on how do we ensure students have successful transitions into our system of post-secondary education. We want to make sure that one, as we partner with our K-12 system partners and we transition them into post-secondary education, that our curriculum is aligned for pathways that lead from non-credit to credit, that we have the appropriate supports for a population of students that hasn't traditionally been served well. And so all of those things it falls under the technical assistance provider. And so that is a current active RFA that is out there. And so we want to make sure that we encourage, districts who might be interested in providing the support for the entire state to apply and join our team. Next, the other piece that I also want to talk about is regulatory action. Recently, we released the updated work experience regulations within the community college system. And one of the things about updating the regulation, first, it hadn't been updated in 50 years. So let's not talk about that, how badly it was needed. But secondly, and I think one of the most important pieces for the audience today is that we made sure that we explicitly called out non-credit. Because if we're trying to intentionally serve adult learners, we need to be able to support them along their educational journey and making sure that they have access to work-based learning, experiential learning opportunities as part of whatever program they enroll in was critical to their success. We've also recently, we conducted a landscape analysis on the impact that an individual's first job has on their lifetime earnings. And so understanding that when they come to us, and the impact that we potentially have on their entire livelihood is super important. And we need to embrace that that is our role in this space. And how do we make those opportunities more accessible, but also more meaningful for students so that they can catapult from when they complete with us into wherever they decide to land. And the last thing I'll mention to the point that was raised earlier about how we are reimagining our contracts and grants. And so moving away from that. And so we were recently given, I say, from the state, $130 million for healthcare pathways for English language learners. And so we're looking at establishing a rubric for how we, dispense and distribute that money across the state, and really trying to be strategic and thoughtful and moving away from the traditional granting process, but really understanding what is happening across the state. How is it, certain parts of the state impacted versus others, who needs more support, who needs, and I'm not saying that one is better than the other. What we're looking at is looking at the data, understanding where the needs are, understanding that there might be areas that need additional support because they have higher demand. So really being thoughtful in how we implement and distribute these dollars across the state. So those are just a few of the things that we are working on. And I don't know if we have any questions that we can answer while we are here. Let me look at. There's a question for UVC Alvarado. Is the Chancellor's Office looking at making non-credit faculty count towards the FON? The FON question keeps coming up.
I know. I will jokingly say what my boss often tells me, which is I'm not Santa Claus. I can't make everything happen. but seriously, so I'm teasing, but more seriously, we are aware, our office is aware that fawn is a challenge for many and for a variety of reasons. So for anyone who tunes into our consultation councils, you will have heard that this is a point of conversation in almost every single meeting. Currently, our chancellor's office does not have an agenda or a set of actions, if you will, around the fawn. We are in continued conversations with our consultation council, which is representative stakeholders from across the system. And we in a perfect world, we would figure out how we make sure that we have equitable counts in the fawn, but as of right now, that is still up in the air. One thing I will flag though, sort of unrelated to the fawn conversation, but I think a potential precursor to future conversations, is that I would encourage everyone, if you haven't already been watching and keeping an eye on our direct assessment competency-based education pilots, I would encourage everyone to be keeping an eye on that, learning more about it. Part of the reason why I point there is because as part of that effort, if we are really going to be able to engage in direct assessment competency-based education, there are many structures we have to wrestle through, one of them being financing, another being what is the relationship of all of this to the fawn, to the 50% rule, to all of the different things. And so we are taking up some of those conversations related to that effort that will likely have impact or potential positive consequences for the non-credit space as well. So just want to flag that as something to keep an eye on. Yeah, and then Social Securities, I'll pass that one to my colleague.
Thank you. So yes, we are aware that the Social Security numbers are an issue, and we are working towards updating how we enroll our students into our system through our CCC Apply application. We know that historically it's been problematic. We are definitely working towards coming up with a more updated solution that allows us to capture the information we need to effectively enroll students, but also to understand where their needs are without violating any privacy rules. And so it is a fine line that we walk with that, but we're definitely aware, and we are working towards finding alternative solutions to collecting that particular piece of data. And then there's a question on the focus groups, and will we be looking at how the data is input and ends up in Launchboard? Absolutely. That is part of the unpacking of the data, is we really want to understand where there's opportunity for improvement, where we may be seeing things in the data that are not actually there. And so looking at how we collect that information, looking at how it's input, how do we make it better, or if what we're collecting is not the right thing. So really all of it, looking at the data, just on a cursory view gives us one, like you slice it one way, you get one view, but I think we're really intent on understanding how certain regions are having amazing outcomes for students, and how do we scale that. And part of that work is really slicing the data several different ways, but also understanding how it gets input. Because if it's simply that everyone's doing a great job, they're just not inputting their data correctly, then that informs our future professional development and the needs that we see for our system and the colleges and the K-12 stakeholders that are engaged in this work, and how do we support them and design professional development that really gets at what is the core issue. And so absolutely, we'll be looking at all of it. I don't see any other questions. Really appreciate everybody's time today and allowing us to come share with you the work that we are engaged in, and we appreciate the invitation to be here and to be a part of this amazing group of professionals that is out there doing the hard work every day. We see you. And I know that for myself and for Marty, we are both always, it's always top of mind how we are serving adult learners, not just within our system, but across the partnerships that we have with our CDE partners. So thank you very much for allowing us to join you today.
All right, thank you so much to our community college chancellor's office colleagues, but we appreciate you being here as well. Thank you so much. At this time, I'm going to invite Dr. Zachary to introduce her team from the California Department of Education.
Great,
Dr.
thank
Zachary?
you thank you so much, Renee. So it is my pleasure to introduce both of the speakers from the California Department of Education today. We have Deputy Superintendent Steve Zimmer. He's the Deputy Superintendent of the Student Support Services Branch at the California Department of Education. And I see that they're not here yet. I know we're a little bit ahead of schedule. So Renee, do you want to hold for a moment, do something else for a moment while I send a quick text? Renee or Veronica?
Yes, we can take questions. If there are any additional questions, please be sure to type them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we can take those questions. Anthony Coronado, I saw that you had your hand raised. I did private message you to let you know if you did have a question, please be sure to type it in the chat or in the Q&A. And outside of that, we just have thank yous in the chat for all of the valuable information that was just presented by Executive Vice Chancellor Alvarado and Vice Chancellor Sanchez. All right, so we'll wait.
We do have a question in the chat from Sarah Walk. And oh, I don't think it pertains to this.
So I can go on. He was just getting out of another meeting, and so they were kind of transitioning from one to the other. So he should be joining in a moment, and he's confirming that Deputy Superintendent Steve Zimmer will be joining. So I'm going to go ahead with the introductions. Again, joining us this morning from the California Department of Education is Deputy Superintendent Steve Zimmer, and he is the Deputy Superintendent for the Student Support Services Branch at the California Department of Education. He is the former president of the Board of Education for the Los Angeles Unified School District and the former senior education advisor to Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti. Steve started teaching English as a second language in LAUSD in 1992. He served as a teacher, a counselor, and a program coordinator for Marshall High School for almost 20 years. Also with us today is Pete Callis, the California State Director for Career Technical Education and the Director over the Career and College Transition Division at the Department of Education. Pete joined the Department of Education in 2012 as a education programs consultant for the Charter School Division and has held a series of increasingly responsible positions at CDE. Prior to becoming the Career and College Transition Division Director, he served as an educational administrator in the Assessment, Development, and Administration Division and over the High School Innovations and Initiatives Office within the Career and College Transition Division. During his tenure in our division, Pete has successfully added career technical education programs at the middle school level and youth apprenticeship programs for high school students. In between principal tenures, he went to the private sector and was a human resources manager at Hewlett Packard. Pete has also served as a high school and middle school principal for over 20 years, along with teaching at the middle school and community college levels for a number of years. Pete holds a bachelor's degree in kinesiology from California State University, Sacramento, a master's degree in curriculum and a master's in business administration from the University of California, Davis. Prior to Pete's career in education, he played professional baseball for the Philadelphia Phillies organization, along with 4 years at the college baseball level at CSU Northridge. It's my pleasure to have both of these individuals here joining us today.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks for the intro. I'm going to kick it off this morning. On behalf of State Superintendent Tony Thurmond, I want to thank you for having us here to speak today. Going with the theme of the summit, the power is yours. Many of you here today assisted with changing the landscape of adult education in California by striving to merge two systems into one at the regional level. The California Adult Education Program, known as CAPE, evolved from Assembly Bill 104, as we know, originally the Adult Education Block Grant, which was written to be a resource for adult educators to access statewide practices and innovative solutions for adult instruction. CAPE enacted education code that established adult education program under the dual administration of the Chancellor's Office from the community colleges and the Superintendent of Public Instruction. The Superintendent and Chancellor are the state officials responsible for identifying and understanding educational needs of adults in our state. These two state leaders work collaboratively to ensure that our two agencies follow the education code to support the effective provision of services that address the educational needs of adults across the state. We're constantly evaluating the needs of adults in California in both of our systems. We know that there are nearly 5 million adults across the state who do not have high school diploma or an equivalency of the high school diploma. We know that there are nearly 6 million adults that have limited English proficiency across the state. We know that there are nearly 1 million adults who are eligible for citizenship courses. Also, we know that there are almost 2 million adults with disabilities that need adult education program support. These are just 4 areas of needs for adult education students. The Superintendent and Chancellor are charged with making sure that the legislative language is followed that drives our work to support the success of adult learners and their educational needs across California, with the funding that is provided by the legislature and the governor. In 2015, we went from 2 separate delivery systems to integrated delivery through interagency collaboration. We moved from funding that was based on enrollment and moved to funding allocated based on regional needs and regional and individual agency effectiveness. We also moved to data-driven decision based on student and fiscal measurement, as well as coordinated partnerships within and among consortia and the braiding of our funding. In 2017, CAPE established 5 overarching guiding principles. And the principles are to implement the letter to the intent of the law, to focus on moving the needle and making a difference for all adult students, ensuring transparency on accountability and engagement, to have a bias for action, and to continuously learn and improve. This year, CAPE is funded at nearly $600 million. This is the largest investment by any state in our country for adult education. The vision for adult education in California was enacted through AB 104, was a regional consortium model, and consists of members from community colleges, K-12 adult schools, and local education agencies. These consortia also bring in partners, including immigrant serving agencies, youth and young adult agencies, corrections, probation, libraries, faith and community-based organizations, social services, and local workforce boards to support our adults across the state. Our vision of a successful CAPE program enables adults to advance their education, to obtain employment, and to improve wages through the comprehensive partnership. The consortium model of collaboration between adult education programs and the other service agencies is unique in our country, and other states are seeking to replicate the great work that we've done here in California. I want to congratulate you on the work that you've done, and you keep moving forward and making continuous improvement to our programs. I'd like to now pass the Zoom microphone over to my Deputy Superintendent of Student Support Services Branch, Steve Zimmer.
Thank you so much, Pete. And on behalf of Superintendent Thurman, I also want to extend my welcome, his welcome to everyone here at the Cape Summit today. This work is very important to the superintendent, to me personally. I have a extensive background in working both with our adult ed programs and also with our community colleges. My motivation for supporting both our community college system and our adult ed system is personal. My maternal grandmother had to drop out of school when she was 15 years old. She lived on the Lower East Side of. She lived in Brooklyn. She went to work in the sweatshops of the Lower East Side of Manhattan. She and my great grandfather became organizers in the United Needle Workers Union at a time when conditions in the fabricas and the sweatshops of Lower Manhattan were appalling, and unfortunately, we know some of those conditions continue to this day. My grandmother worked from the time that she was 15 years old, and even before, but worked full time from the time that she was 15 years old until her 75th birthday, when she finally retired. And I thought, she would. The first thing she would do is, come out and see her grandkids. But the first thing she did on the morning after she retired is she walked down that block in Brooklyn, and she walked into her neighborhood adult school, and she registered to get, for her classes to earn her high school diploma. And 2 years later, at the age of 77, because of the adult system, she finally walked the stage. And I'll never forget what the New York City system of adult and career education did for our family. Fast forward, 40 years later, I never dreamed to think or thought to dream that I would be in a position where I could have some kind of impact on returning that real empowerment that the system of adult education gave to our family. But I did. And I hope I didn't waste any of that opportunity. The students that I worked with over the course of my career were never advanced placement students. They were often the students at the greatest risk and the greatest peril. We never looked at them through a deficit lens. We looked at them through the lens of their strengths and their assets. But the challenges that they faced were many, and they were great. And I'm a fan, as big a fan of resilience as anybody. But all too often, our pretty oppressive system, and our pretty systemically oppressive system of public education uplifted a few stories of students who were, in advanced placement classes, fighting against all odds to succeed. And I respect that, but those weren't the students that I worked with. And I know that our adult education system and our community college system serve family systems. Children do not exist in a vacuum. And they do not exist in opposition to their family or their community. It is all one. And that is why this this consortium and this partnership and the key elements of the technical assistance that is aligned with many of the superintendent's priorities are so important. When we talk about the essential elements of equity, leadership, learner transition, being able to promote our programs, have folks understand our programs, being able to look at program development and curriculum through this lens, to be able to assess our programs in ways that are truly meaningful, and understanding the new reality that we're living in technical and distance learning. This is the essential work. And we must do this in full collaboration and partnership, because the very adult learners that we seek to serve in the most important moment that I think our system has ever faced, their kids, their children are not in this moment necessarily willing to take that leap right away to a four-year university. Because I don't need to tell you the disparity with which COVID has impacted already oppressed communities. Life and death. And when you are afraid that you're going to lose the person that is the closest to you, or that they might need you in a moment of urgency, you may not be willing to take that trip across the country. You may not be willing to even go up north or down south to jump into a four-year program. And so we have to have these seamless transitions, this seamless partnership, this authentic articulation of our work, because our families need us like never before. Families have taken stock of what is truly the most important. I know we've done this for ourselves. There's not one of us on this Zoom call that hasn't been affected by this pandemic in profound ways. Sometimes in ways of loss that we truly haven't wrapped our heads around yet. We understand, because so many of us were involved in the struggle way before there was ever a pandemic, because we know that before there was a pandemic, disparity in public education was endemic. And we have been working directly, we in the adult education system, we in the community college system, we have been working to eradicate those disparities. We work at the intersection of hope and possibility. We don't need to look far for hope. Those of us who have taught adult ed, those of us who have been in leadership in adult ed, those of us who have taught in community colleges or got to work, as I did, on the College Promise program in Los Angeles, we don't need to look far for hope. It is all around us in abundance. But possibility is where we turn hope into real transformational change. Not for one child who will be the exception, and then bear the burden of becoming the anchor for their family, though we know how important that is. But true educational transformation for the entire family system. That same grandmother who came back to the public education system at 75 years old brought my mom and my uncle to PS 178 in Brooklyn as a widow in conditions of abject poverty, with nothing more than a dream that her children would not have to go through what she went through. Friends, the names may be different today, but the dreams are not. And our responsibility as a collaborative, particularly in CAPE, is to not accept kids or families as handed off, but to clasp hands with them, to guide and to provide possibility that these dreams can become reality. And today, like never before, we understand the interconnectedness of not only our fear, not only our vulnerabilities, but our hopes and our dreams. And if the dreams of those who have been oppressed for the longest by our systems are not uplifted and made possible by collaborations like these, then all of our dreams, in fact, are compromised in this moment more than ever. So I thank you for the difficult work that you do. I know that collaboration is not easy. I know that it is easier to return to our safer places and to our silos. It's easier for us to not have the difficult conversations we need to have to make sure that this works. It's difficult to not compete. Our families need us to work together. Their dreams are certainly worth it, and our communities are depending on us. So thank you for the work that you do, and on behalf of the superintendent, I hope that you have a great summit, but I hope even more that the work continues with urgency and authenticity beyond today. Thanks so much for the opportunity to join me today.
And I want to thank our California Department of Education colleagues for your moving messages, and also again to our Chancellor's Office colleagues for their messages this morning as well, to really kick us off with the Summit 22. At this time, we're going to transition, and we're going to invite Dr. Zachary and Dean Adams back for a CAPE update. And I think just if you can give us just a moment, we're going to transition to their slide deck and their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. That's a tough act to follow, both informatively and inspirationally. It is heartwarming to hear someone speak from their heart like that. And I think it goes to, I think the phrase that Steve used was authentic articulation. Carolyn and I, every week, at least once a week, try and meet to make sure that we're modeling what you and the consortia are modeling so well. Next slide. Our agenda today will talk about the K statewide averages. We'll give a funding update, and then we'll talk about new initiatives. Carolyn?
Thank you so much, Gary. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So these are kind of hot off the press preliminary CAPE numbers. I want to first make sure that you know that these numbers are only the numbers that have been provided to CASAS. So it's all CAPE K-12 agencies and all community college non-credit programs that are WIOA funded. So that you have a perspective of what this data is. But I do think that in general, what this data shows us is a trend of increasing enrollment, kind of a rebound from the pandemic. So you'll see that we had a total number of enrollees in 2021-22, again, preliminary numbers of 548, almost 549,000 students enrolled. And of those students, we had about 338,000 that were actually participants. So they had 12 or more hours within our programs. And obviously on this slide, you can see how that data is broken down into the various areas in CAPE. This slide deck will be available afterwards, so you can dive deeper into these preliminary numbers. Again, just reminding you that these are preliminary numbers. I think the other piece that's important on here is the very final row that talks about the unduplicated enrollees. So that means students aren't in perhaps adult secondary education as well as a CTE class, right? So that's our number. Again, I know it looks low, right? 250,000 looks like a low number, but it's not as low as it was last year or the year before. So we're really coming out of the pandemic as we're moving forward. The next slide, please. Again, this is some more of those numbers, really looking at those unduplicated number of students who were participants, who completed 12 more hours of instruction. And of those students, about 162,000 completed at least one test. Only about half or a little less than half completed both a matched test, right? A matched pre and post test. And of those students, we had 60,000 students that moved their learning gains. But in addition, we had almost 95,000 students have other literacy gains in addition to beyond the educational functioning level gains. Next slide, please. This gives you just kind of an idea of how that is broken down between ASE, ABE, and ASE, where we're looking at those matched tests. We don't have percentages on here. That would be probably a helpful piece to put on this slide, because I think that we tend to see fewer students getting their post-test if they're in ASE or in CTE, because they're moving on to something else. They earn that certificate and they've moved on and they're not coming back to post-test. Or the same thing with ASE, they're earning their equivalency and they're moving on, and we're not getting them back for the post-test. So I think that's something important for all of you to think about and to be looking at how you might find ways to ensure that you're post-testing those students. Next slide. All right, Gary, off to allocations.
Thank you, Carolyn. Next slide. As I think Pete referenced, we have seen a steady increase in funding for the CAPE program. This fiscal year, we will see 603,100,000 in the program. That is a 6.5 percent increase, 36, almost 37 million. So it indicates the confidence of the governor and the legislature in the work that you do every day with adult learners. In addition to that, we were given a one-time $130 million investment to support healthcare focused vocational pathways for English language learners. I think Sandra referenced that earlier in her remarks. Next slide. This shows the split between the non-credit programs and the adult school programs. Next slide. And this is a reminder of the restrictions around CAPE funding that are in Ed Code or in budget supplemental language. Carolyn?
Next slide, please. Just want to make sure that you all have these reminders as to the allocation process and then some other important dates and processes that you'll need to remember. So in February, we release preliminary allocations for CAPE. That's always based on the governor's budget, the January budget, which we know is not a final budget, but we need to make sure that you can all start working on your preliminary budgets and have your public meetings so that we can decide on those allocations. The importance of all of that is so that once the budget is finally signed, and we know that sometimes you have to go back and do some revisions, but once the budget is signed in July, then we can work as our two state agencies to using the new process that Department of Finance came up to move funds from one agency to the other, we can get that done and we can get funding out to all of you in August or early September. And this year, we know that funding was out from the State Controller's Office 2 weeks earlier than it was in the prior year. So we know that this new mechanism is working very well. Then in September, you have that opportunity to really finalize your budgets, get your work plan together, certify both of those items, and then in December, you have those actuals that are due, your program area reports. So next slide, please. All right, again, looking at some planning, right? So the 3-year timeline or the 3-year planning is in education code. It has a process for every 3 years. You're really submitting this big picture plan that you're going to then look at on an annual basis. But these plans should have member level goals and targets, again, using data, right, for those planning purposes. Next slide, please. The second part of all of this is that you have to approve at your local level your plan, and then you can put it into NOVA. And then you're asked on an annual basis to look at your 3-year plan and talk about what you've done annually and how you're going to move forward your program. Always with the goal in mind of using data to move your program forward, right? That continuous improvement model of reevaluating and moving forward in that 3-year cycle. Next slide, please. This is just a visual, and I think you'll find this much more useful when you see it in the, when you get the PowerPoint slides. It's a little difficult to read on the screen here. So we'll go on to the next slide. And this is, no, I'm doing a couple of these, aren't I, Gary? Okay, next slide. We're going to talk about some new initiatives. Next slide. As was mentioned earlier when Gary was talking about the allocations, we do have this $130 million investment that is supporting healthcare-focused vocational pathways for English language learners. Next slide. The details are in the trailer bill with the idea of looking at how can we develop bridge programs, IET programs, any type of a program to help our English learners really to move into those healthcare, allied health programs and pathways from adult education into, credit programs at the community college where they're furthering that post-secondary degree. The legislation requires that there are funding solicitations. That's a word that we don't normally use in education. We talk about an RFA, but that is out for the field by March 1st, 2023. And as you heard earlier from the Chancellor's office, that we're looking at how we're going to be pulling that RFA together with some very specific metrics that we will be asking consortia to consider while they're looking at this application and this funding opportunity. There will be input from the field, again, as listed in the trailer bill language, a balanced representation of K-12 adult school and community college adult education providers. We think your input will be valuable on this in letting us know where some of the barriers are going to be. We already know one of the barriers is going to be on providing instructors and finding instructors. And so helping us to think outside the box at the state level with our state partners of labor, the Workforce Development Agency, Health and Human Services, we're all collaborating, but helping us to think outside the box on this would be very helpful. So I know that work group will be beneficial in moving this healthcare funding solicitation forward. Next slide, please. So start thinking about what could a pathway look like in your consortia. So think about those consortia pathways. I see Kim put a quick thing in the chat about pathway to citizenship with right to work documents. And that is essential. And that's part of what we've talked about. Additionally, looking at your students who are who have been educated in their first countries, who have a healthcare background. How do we help them on that path to citizenship and English learning to move maybe a little faster into healthcare, the healthcare pathway? So be thinking about that, and more details to come as we move forward with this work. Next slide, please. I think this is yours, Gary. Yes.
Thank you, Carolyn. So we are all familiar with AB 1491, the carryover implementation statute. It basically focuses on unspent adult ed funds from the prior fiscal year, certified on and before September 1 of the current fiscal year. And it speaks to the amount of that carryover that a consortia may do. The one exception being that the member that has been consistently ineffective having excessive carryover for at least 2 consecutive fiscal years, beginning in this current fiscal year, that at the state office, we would look at possible reasonable interventions to help assist. Next slide. This is further discussion. That critical number is 1 or more fiscal years exceeding 20%. Next slide. We're working on a state policy jointly with the Chancellor's Office and the California Department of Education on a statewide policy regarding carryover. And we hope to have something in January.
All right. Next slide, please. So think about if you want to further think about the healthcare funding or just think about your students in general, one of the areas that the CDE is focused on this year that will certainly impact CAPE, and that is on enrollment and recruitment, which all of you are involved in. And one of the pieces that the department has come up with is this student journey map. So if you want to go on to the next slide for me, thank you so much. This is a student journey map that some of the staff at CDE developed during a national training this summer. We're going to be making this available for all of you in a Word document so you can change it around for your agency. But it's really looking at your students and your potential students and where they are and what their journey through your program is going to be. Something like this could be very useful when you're thinking about that healthcare pathway and where you're looking for those students who are interested, and I think that's an important piece, who are interested in your healthcare pathway. And you may want to, those of you that currently have strong healthcare programs, you may want to be recruiting some of your student leaders to be talking about their story and why they're in healthcare to help do some recruitment of your students. So again, this would be made available in a Word document so you can change it for your school, change it for your consortia, so it makes sense for what you're doing. But I think going back and looking from that student perspective, it helps us to think about what barriers or pain points our students might have when they're trying to come into our adult education system. Gary, next slide, I think is yours.
Thank you, Carolyn. As Sandra referenced, we currently have an RFA out, and it's entitled Community College TAP, but it really is, I need to reinforce that there's a single CAPE TAP office. I think we all feel that Renee, Veronica, and their team have done and are doing a fantastic job. This is an effort to enhance the TAP office by providing a targeted technical assistance from an outstanding non-credit community college program. Next slide. So this slide shows once that technical assistance provider from the non-credit side joins with Renee and Veronica and their team, they will create the single TAP office. Those two, the community college non-credit provider and Renee and her team, they will meet on a regular basis regarding technical assistance needs of the field, professional development needs, and they will make recommendations up to the Cape State Leadership Office, which is comprised of the California Department of Education and the Chancellor's Office. And this entire structure supports our 71 Cape Regional Consortia. Carolyn, I think you're wrapping up.
I am. So we want to thank everyone again for participating in the Cape Summit this year. And I'm looking at one question in the Q&A, and that has to do with, will the funding solicitations be at the consortia level or agency level? At this point, we haven't made a final decision on this, but so you'll just more information to come on that as we move forward. If you think about it, this is Cape dollars, right? And so Cape is really looking at consortia work. So we'll have to be taking that into consideration as we are putting the solicitation together. And the other one, I don't know. The other one I think would be more Veronica or Renee can answer about where will there be sessions on healthcare funding for adult ed in this conference. And I do know there is one IET session later, and so I think they can answer that.
I'm going to invite Veronica to answer that. Or I don't know off the top of my head without pulling up the schedule. Veronica?
Yes, there is the one IUT session. Other than that, no, there are no other sessions on the healthcare funding for adult ed at this particular conference this time around. And then there are other questions in the chat, Carolyn and Gary.
Right. So I think, Gary, a question is the TAP specific for educators to support students? And I'm not sure if that's directed to the community college TAP or TAP in general.
Again, the TAP office is targeted to provide support to the regional consortia. This is simply adding non-credit expertise into that TAP office.
So I think in general, I think to further your the answer to that, Gary, is that TAP is really for teachers and for administrators. So TAP provides assistance to consortia directors through webinars that are related to planning and CFAD and all of those pieces, as well as to teachers and instructors at non-credit and K-12 adult instructors on methods of andragogy and ways to use Google Classroom or different technologies within your programs, or on IET or English Learner. So they really are providing that professional development for multiple levels. So I hope that's if that answers that question. There's another question in the chat about wondering where the money is coming from for the community college chat or TAP.
Again, it's not targeted to the, it's not a community college specific. It is adding non-credit technical assistance to the TAP office. The money is coming out of the appropriation that annually comes to the program.
Okay, I want to thank Gary and Carolyn for being with us this morning. If we have any final questions for them about what they've shared with us in their update this morning, I would invite those we might have a few more minutes before we wrap up completely, but otherwise, I just want to share my sincere thanks for being with us this morning, really giving us a great kickoff to the Summit 2022, and for inviting each of your colleagues from the Chancellor's Office and the CDE to share their vision as to how each of the initiatives at their respective offices play into adult ed and really build us up in our adult education system. So thank you to both of you so much. I'm looking for any additional.
I think we could also save the chat and answer some of these later through some type of an FAQ.
Okay.
There will be an FAQ for the RFA that will be published soon.
Okay. Okay, I think at this time we'll take your advice, Carolyn, and we'll save the webinar chat. We will respond to these in some other fashion. I appreciate that everyone has put down your thoughts in the chat and shared your thoughts and concerns with us. And there's even mention of having a space for additional dialogue about some of the topics that have been brought up in the chat, and we'll certainly try to accommodate that the best that we can. So
Renee, we'll get the map out. Saw a couple of people asking about the map. We'll get the map out so that can be shared. I'll send that to you, and you guys can send it out.
Okay.
Or post
All
it,
right.
however you want to do it.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. Okay, I'm going to pass it back to Amanda Lee at this point, our tech host.
Sure. Thank you, Renee, and thank you, Gary and Carolyn, for being with us. And thank you all today for participating, for adding to the chat. We really do appreciate that. I have dropped in the chat earlier an opportunity to give us additional feedback. So please take a few minutes and find time to go ahead and do that. Today is the first day of our CAEP Summit 2022. So we do thank you all for being here with us online. We are going to go ahead and close out today's session, but know that we will be back at 1 o'clock. So we do invite you to come and chat with us on our platform, as well as chat and meet with some of our exhibitors, and then take a look at our schedule and create your own MyCAEP Summit schedule, where you'll be able to curate your own schedule where you can easily come and go and join our sessions about 5 minutes prior to them kicking off. Thank you again, and we'll see you soon.